Looking into Central Avenue, I found out that there was much more than just jazz happening. Jazz was definitely the most prominent attraction since it was, the most popular at the time. But you also had R&B going on. You had song and dance routines. You had comedy going on. There was the blues happening. There was reviews. Shake dancing was going on. Vaudeville was going on. But over the years, Central Avenue has really been known for the jazz that came out of it in its heyday.
Why isn't it known for the shake dancing?
That's more of a Long Beach thing, all right? For really only covering music and venues, I felt completely overwhelmed when I started to tackle this. Oh my
God, I had no idea what we were getting ourselves into.
It's so much. There's so much.
We were both crying the whole time when I was just reading.
There was at least 2 attempts to create like a timeline, like to just map out a timeline, and I was just like, I don't know everybody's doing everything all the time.
Kind of like jazz.
Kind of like...
I just don't get it.
My whole timeline was scat. It was all scat and bebop. So
scat as in animal droppings.
Yeah, animal. You wish it was animal droppings. It's people droppings. I try to concentrate on area specifics and stories that I thought were interesting. So I'm not going to spend too much time explaining names and their importance, which I feel kind of guilty about. But I'm hoping we can spotlight certain LA jazz performers later on.
Yeah.
I'm not going to spend a lot of time going over people. I'm not going to talk about the history of Dizzy Gillespie. I'm just going to Gillespie.
You're not even going to take the time to learn his name.
Listen, Dizzy G. The Diz.
Kenny G's brother.
Kenny G's brother.
Kenny Gillespie.
Kenny Gillespie. Many say that the West Coast jazz sound is very influenced by the New Orleans jazz sound, which was full of swing and improvisation. Nolans, of course, with all due respect. West Coast jazz, or cool jazz as it was later known, is very flowy and relaxing, which we'll get into how musicians feel about that label a little later. But early New Orleans and West Coast do have some layover. It's probably true what they say about the influence due to the fact that a lot of early musicians from the other LA, being Louisiana, migrated west after the First World War.
They got confused.
It's not as hot as it should be.
Where are all the crawfish?
I could swim in this water. Before the big move occurred, however, many cite that the first LA jazz band was the Black and Tan Jazz Orchestra, who were playing the Cadillac Club as early as 1916. The Cadillac Club, which I'm pretty sure is the same as a Cadillac Cafe, I found like both names popping up, was at 553 South Central Avenue, which was one of the earliest jazz spots on Central Avenue.
What's Central Avenue?
Listen. Don't throw me with questions, you know that. The Black and Tan Orchestra were originally from Texas, and they were described as a 10-piece cakewalk and ragtime brass band, which I love cakewalking, throw it in the description of that. I believe upon their arrival in California, they cut the 10-piece down to a quintet and began rearranging their sound and style, so they started filling the environment a little more and playing according to that, which I don't have no idea how musicians do that, how they fill an area out. They're like, yeah, no, we need one less chorus. They were popular as a live band, as popular as the other 2 jazz giants making sounds around the time, which was Kid Ory and Jelly Roll Morton. I believe the major distinction was that Kid Ory and Morton were sort of a little more well-known when they came to Los Angeles, and the Black and Tan Orchestra became popular here for the first time. And they also were never recorded, which is a damn shame. Which they could have been awful. I don't know. What do I get?
Yeah, don't put them on this pedestal.
Yeah, no.
The only Black and Tan I like is when you get some peanut butter and you put some chocolate on it. Isn't that what those are?
Yeah, that's exactly what they're talking about.
I liked it when it was a 10-piece.
Jelly Roll Morton.
Another food I love to eat.
Came to Los Angeles from Nolans around 1917, although many say that he was here scouting the scene since 1909. Ask me why they call him Jelly Roll, Daniel.
I refuse to ask why they call him Jelly Roll.
Ask me what that alludes to.
I do not want...
A phallus? Maybe he
horribly disfigured phallus? Is that what you want to hear?
His real name was Ferdinand, which must have been too vagina-y for him. His real name was Ferdinand, though. If you're wondering Jelly Roll Morton's place in jazz history, he claimed to be the inventor of jazz. Good for him. His most famous works include King Porter's Stomp and the Wolverine Blues, which he co-wrote with 2 Central Avenue business owners, the Spike brothers, Benjamin and John. Benjamin, like Morton, was very boastful. He claimed to be the world's greatest saxophone player.
Without ever even having played.
The Spike brothers owned a record store at 1203 South Central Avenue, which became the centerpiece of LA jazz for some time. They sold instruments as well as records, and they ran a record label and publishing company. The 2 brothers were essential not only for managing to record many of the New Orleans musicians who came to LA and were just passing through, they also supplied Central Avenue with instruments. They supplied all the musicians instruments, so it was like a healthy resource.
Where'd they get those from?
Thievery, great train robberies. They made them they're all windpipes.
Remember Gravedigger Johnson?
Morton and his wife stayed for some years at 1013 and a half South Central Avenue, which he also used as a pimping office. Yep. Jelly Roll
Classy pimps.
Classy pimps. Come on.
No one's getting beaten.
Big hats.
Big hats.
Big hats. Jelly Roll Morton was a
wearing
pimp.
Furry dice around their neck.
Ridiculous size aviator glasses.
Canes with dinosaurs in amber. on top.
He took a credential workshop on how to spin a cane.
He was an accredited pimp.
Part-time pimp, part-time piano player. He made most of his money from the Pacific Coastline, which was the name of a group of girls he pimped for. As one friend put it, you didn't think Jally got all his diamonds he wore on his garters with the $35 a week he makes making music, do you?
Oh, no. He had a wife.
For shame.
A wife and a mother.
Tell those hoes to get back on the street.
His wife was his mother.
He played a few clubs in the area, the Penny Dance Hall at 9th Street, the Cadillac Cafe, and the Murray's Cafe, which were both owned, I believe, at the same time by a man named Murray. Kid Ory was another Nolans transplant who came to LA looking for work around 1919. In the long run, California didn't really work for him, so he ended up going to Chicago, but he managed to make an impression on Central Avenue and even recorded Ory's Creole trombone with the Sunshine Record Company when he was here. When Kid Ory played the Cadillac, he wanted to promote the show the way you would in New Orleans. So what he did was he got an advertising truck, got the band aboard, piano and all, and rode down Central Avenue playing live from the train station to the front door of the Cadillac like a ragtime Pied Piper.
Rats really did follow him. Who would have thought they loved New Orleans jazz?
Syncopated thing. I
can really swing my tail to it.
And that's how all the rats with the thing. I talked about it too.
The plague.
The plague.
It's called the plague. Its name was Milo.
When they weren't working at Universal, of course. The Cadillac was a black and tan club, meaning it was integrated. The deal with that arrangement was that black men couldn't dance with white women, but they did anyways. And they were raided and closed down for it. They managed to reopen the club, but again, the integrated dancing continued. And after they got raided for a second time, it closed for good. White women. Ory returned to LA in the late 20s and gave up playing music for about a decade. He was rediscovered in the 40s, probably when jazz was going through like its third or fourth wave. And when that occurred, he had been doing odd jobs like sorting mail and raising chickens. He had a small revival thanks to Orson Welles, who would on occasion come down to Central Avenue and just hang out. Welles was very into Dixieland jazz, which kind of explains that, and got Ory out of retirement by frequently featuring him on his radio broadcasts. Although he spent the last years of his life in Honolulu, Kid Ory is buried at the...
Boo-hoo.
Poor guy. It's just all these pineapples.
He's in a better place.
Inside joke. Although he spent the last few years of his life in Honolulu, like I just said, Kid Ory is buried at the Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City, a few feet from Bela Lugosi.
Scaring him every night.
Ory. Ory.
Hey, kid.
Hey, kid.
You ever seen an undead body?
Good old Louis Armstrong. Satchmo himself lived in Culver City in the 30s, where he performed at the Cotton Club with another one of my favorite jazz performers, drummer and vibraphonist Lionel Hampton, who would play a very famous show with Benny Goodman that I'll get to later. Lionel Hampton's Flying Home suggested listening. Satchmo suggested listening everything. Spent most of his time in Los Angeles doing radio broadcasts and having small film cameos as well as just performing at the Cotton Club.
Was he on Central Avenue?
He stopped by at the Dunbar. He was busted for pot possession, not Satchmo, but then he soon bailed on Los Angeles as a living environment, so he left. Duke Ellington, also a Dunbar frequent, and his orchestra came down frequently to record and appear on the big screen. They were in a movie called Black and Tan, which is a thing I've said way too much already. After spending some time in LA, he became inspired by the convergence of Hollywood glamour and emerging civil rights activism, and he wanted to create a show that reflected that combination of social environments. So Ellington created Jump for Joy, which opened in July of 1941 at the Mayan Theater on Olympic, a little bit off of Central Avenue, but I feel it's important, with an all-black cast. Strangely, it premiered the same day Jelly Roll Morton died. Suspicious.
Yeah, that's no coincidence.
It's all, they track it down. I mean, we saw the crime here. Jump for Joy has a cast of 60 performers who Ellington refused to blacken up the way Hollywood tended to do with this type of project, and featured 30 songs and sketches altogether, and dealt with many aspects of African-American culture, from a tender love song, the brown skin girl in the calico gown, to the controversial yet upbeat Passport from Georgia, which has references to lynching and the KKK in it. Passport from Georgia was pulled almost immediately from the show, but days later Ellington insisted it be performed. Show ran until September of that year, 122 shows, and it was really successful. Ellington planned on taking Jump for Joy on a national tour to Broadway, but those plans were scrapped after Japan bombed Pearl Harbor and many cast members were drafted. Speaking of scraps, what are you doing for the war effort?
All of my bubblegum wrappers. I'm turning it into a big ball.
Making a novel out of those Bazooka Joe comics.
I'm sending it to the troops. Come on, for the troops.
Back to Central Avenue, yeah? Let's do that.
Please.
Please, God.
Please.
Jefferson High School is very important. 1319 East 41st Street. It's just off of Central Avenue. Jefferson, or Jeff, as they called it, was a local Central Avenue high school. Many well-known Los Angeles musicians attended this school. Among them, Dexter Gordon, Chico Hamilton, Big J McNeely, Sonny Chris, Horace Tapscott, Frank Morgan, Roy Ayers. All of these talented players practiced under one extraordinary teacher, Samuel Brown, Mr. B. I don't know if they call him that.
Mr. B.
Hey, Mr. B. So this rubs a little bit with what you were saying. Who were you saying the first teacher was? Bessie
Burke.
Bessie Burke, that's right.
Black Superman's girlfriend.
Black Superman's girlfriend.
Or maybe superhero herself.
Yeah, you don't know.
She's a teacher.
The first African-American high school teacher hired by Ali's school system was Samuel Brown. I'm thinking because black teachers were hired at an elementary level, but they couldn't work the high school levels, especially along the Central Ave corridor. So I think he was the first one that broke that one.
Okay.
He's like a Peter Suhu, but for the black community.
Yeah. Music teachers seem to be a big deal.
Yeah.
It seemed.
I was reading, I don't think I took note that a lot of people who weren't even like credentialed teachers at schools were just teaching jazz to each other. They were just teaching like, here, sit down, I'll teach you how to play the saxophone.
The most simplest instrument for a child. The saxophone.
Ask Lisa Simpson.
She's always getting kicked out of class for playing it too well.
Although not a jazz musician, Dorothy Dandridge was a student at Jeff. First African-American to be nominated in an Academy Award for Best Actress for the movie Carmen Jones. Brown said in an interview about being hired, the oral exam committee was concerned about what I would do if I had white students in my class, how I would handle it, to which he replied, I'll just teach them, that's all. Nothing special. That was a question someone asked. I was a professional to another professional. Brown was also known as the Count, not Count Basie, Count Brown. He was
Count like Kid Ory's grave mate?
A lot of counts. 1, 2 graves.
1, 2, 3, 4x4 tempo.
Keep the pace now. Brown was responsible for 3 school orchestras that performed around town, both for public and private events. So his students were now playing for money. Formal classes in music were available at all levels of public education, both at Jefferson and another high school nearby called Jordan. The curriculum included courses in music theory, music appreciation, harmony, counterpoint, orchestra, band, and choir. There was a class on big band that was created, which I would have just loved to take it, even though I don't play an instrument. I just like to be there. Brown said, I didn't bring jazz in. It was already there. I just met it head on. I put my arms around it. I salvaged it and tried to make it respectable because it was here to stay. So he obviously saw the future of jazz, which was really neat.
Yeah, because it's going so strong today.
You tell Wynton Marsalis
Take that. Yeah. Take that, Marsalis clan.
For inspiring musicians, 6th period each day at Jeff in Bungalow 11 was jazz band class, which included writing, arranging, performing, as well as occasional visits by Avenue musicians. He had professional musicians stop by classes. Nat King Cole came by, Lionel Hampton.
Could you imagine the day? All right, special guest today, Nat King Cole.
What was the question? Oh, everybody? Okay. Lionel Hampton came to consult students. He brought in famous composers. W.C. Handy stopped by one day. Really incredible. I know, that's a big deal.
I mean, they're all big deals, but that's like very weird.
That's history, yeah. Speaking of positive influence, you got the local 767 located 5 blocks from the Spike Brothers record store, which was, like I said, another great resource for musicians. A local 767 was a musicians union, but because of segregation, there were 2 musician unions in our city. The Black Musicians Union was local 767, operated at 710 South Central under the dutiful Elmer Fain. It was formed in 1920 and served as a meeting place, a clearinghouse, and a rehearsal space for black musicians who were denied membership in the other musicians union, which was local 47, which was housed in Hollywood for the whites. I loved
present.
It. More importantly, though, local 767 was everyone's favorite hangout. They had barbecues there. If there was a parade on the avenue, the after party would be at the house. Helped build the scene and create a stronger sense of community, which was really important because that's what drove the jazz scene for a very long time. The 767 was another positive force on the avenue and was responsible for a great amount of employment for musicians. To be a successful musician in the area, you had to be a card-carrying member because next to talent, it was the most essential tool in the musician's toolkit. Union-sanctioned gigs were thoroughly rewarding. You were compensated well and your spot was protected. So it was very essential. I'm really liking reading how the community was built, mostly off positive reinforcement, which was really neat. The union head was a man by the name of James Petrillo, who was not black, who was the head of the union from 1940 to 1958. He was responsible for 2 separate recording bands that effectively shut down the market for new recordings to force a deal for higher royalties. Some say the bands hurt the music scene because it meant that some great bands that were passing through were never recorded and their sound is lost. But the band was really successful in fighting for better pay for musicians, so I really don't know. Let's talk about some of the other clubs now. Let's get us back on Central Avenue.
Please.
I provided positive reinforcement. How does it all play out?
Now you're going to hit us with a stick, a hickory stick.
The biggest stick you've ever seen. You had Dreamland Hall, 8th and Spring, one of the first black-owned alley dance clubs off the Central, but one of the first. The Cadillac Cafe and Murray's Cafe, like I said, was around 56, and Central apparently both owned by a man named Murray, although I've read that the Cadillac's owner was a guy named Rich Baker, so it must have just changed hands. But it got more popular when Rich Baker was in charge.
Makeup artist?
I think you're thinking of Rick Baker.
Yeah, Rich Baker.
Yeah, Rich Baker. Yeah, Rich Baker.
Or that really wealthy donut chef. Is that the one?
Rich bag, get it now? That took me a minute.
It was a real thinker.
You got the Lincoln Theater, Central and 24th. That means I passed it a lot. And I had no idea that it was anything. Yeah. The Lincoln Theater opened in...
Well, now it is.
There's a perfectly good reason why you don't have no information on it. The Lincoln Theater opened in 1927 and became one of the more glamorous venues in the city had to offer. It could accommodate 2,100 seated guests.
2,100?
Yeah, 2,100.
Oh, for some reason I was thinking 21,000.
That's a big difference. Yeah, it could fit everybody who's sleeping on the streets in Bronzeville could actually just go hang out at the Lincoln.
It wasn't so much a theater as a coliseum.
Many called the Lincoln the West Coast Apollo. The Lincoln Theater was popular during the 30s when local big bands and musicians performed there. When Lionel Hampton got his own big band, they performed there, as did Powerhouse Duke Ellington's orchestra performed there.
Old Powerhouse Duke.
Oh, Powerhouse Duke, that's what they called them. During the week, local reviews and comedy acts took the stage. That's really neat. Within walking distance and attempts at rivaling the Lincoln were smaller venues like the Jungle Room, the Kentucky Club, and the Cabin Inn, which I'm very curious about, but I found very little information, only that they were walking distance. The Lincoln Theater is now a rundown church. I'll get back to the Lincoln Theater later. Then the big one. You ready for it? Club Alabama. Ooh, we like the sound of that. Alabama. It was connected to the Dunbar Hotel, so it was incredibly popular because anybody who stopped by the Dunbar is going to, of course, check out what's going on at the Alabama.
Can't have one without the other.
This is the best. Married with Children.
Peg.
Al.
Wait a minute. Al didn't sound like that.
Peg. Al.
What Al?
Her name was Callie Bundy. Did I get Callie Bundy?
Right.
Yeah. It was you that I got in a huge, oh God, what was her name?
Don't look it up. We can't remember all the names of the Bundys.
Who are we? Club Alabama was the best known of the night spots. It was the hottest, and I don't mean temperature-wise. I mean, there's a lot of people in there, so I probably got it hot. Everyone was probably drinking. The ritziest, the most decadent of all the Central Avenue clubs. Silk drapes, colored lights, waitresses in scanty dresses. It was once the focal point of jazz on the avenue. The crowds got dressed up. They served steak dinners. There was valet parking.
Now you got me. Was the valet parking free?
Well, who would pay for that kind of thing? Not
Hattie McDaniel?
Who took my Ford denim? There was always a really great show featured, whether it was music, comedy, or showgirls. My ideal show, all three. Club Alabama.
We know what your idea is.
It's very funny burlesque that also has a big band. Club Alabama opened in the fall of 1928 and was run by Curtis Mosby, who was the former bandleader drummer at the Lincoln Theater. Mosby's Blues Blowers provided the house big band that performed.
The Blues Brothers?
Yeah, the Blues Blowers, which is not an easy thing. Say it. You try say it.
The Blues Brothers.
One more time.
The Blues Brothers 2000.
Mosby's Blues Blowers. That does not sound right. It sounds like I'm messing it up.
Yeah.
It sounds like I'm messing it up. Mosby's Blues Blowers provided the house big band that performed for top entertainers like Duke Ellington. He's everywhere. The Duke. You can't get rid of the guy.
That's why they call him the Duke.
Because you can't get rid of him. We got to duke it out. Yeah. The Alabama featured dancing and entertainment nightly, although I've heard Thursday nights was the night to be there. I don't really know why, but I kept reading, oh yeah, we all showed up on Thursday. All right. Payday, maybe. Names that came by: Lena Horne, Fats Waller, an impromptu performance by an audience member, Frank Sinatra.
Whoa.
I know. Johnny Otis, if you know big band music, Johnny Otis started playing there, and then he got bigger. I think he moved to Lincoln, then came back to the Alabama.
He became Fats Waller.
He became Chubby Checker. Celebrities, of course, would frequent there. If you're at the Dunbar and you're Joe Louis or Jack Johnson, of course you're going to go hang out at the Alabama. Naturally. Joe Louis even used the Alabama to train in there when he was in Los Angeles. House bands featured at the different times: Charles Mingus, local hero.
Local boy.
Art Pepper, local boy.
Local hero.
Dexter Gordon.
Local disgrace.
Curtis Mosby, who was the owner, was a really curious figure in this scene. He owned and operated the ritziest nightclub on the avenue. He was the honorary mayor of Central Avenue for a while. He bridged the gap between two generations of black music. He claimed to have many talents. He was a drummer and a band leader, but he also said he was a composer. But many have challenged this, saying that they never actually saw him perform, really, or they never really saw anything he wrote. Lionel Hampton said anytime that there was a moment for Mosby to play the drums, that he'd just have Hampton do it. His business savvy was questionable as well. By all accounts, he was a little crooked. He owed a lot of people money. He was paying people under the table, which was a no-no, so the union went after him. So the musicians had to go to the union to collect what Mosby owed them. He declared bankruptcy in the 40s, but it was discovered around this time that he hid his part of the ownerships of the Alabama from creditors and bankruptcy courts, so he had to plead guilty to that. Mosby had to serve 2 years in jails for tax evasion, and without skipping a beat, his brother Esvin,
Always the musician.
Always a musician.
Never skipping a beat.
His brother Esvin, who we'll get to, took over as honorary mayor of Central Avenue right away. He was now the Mosby that got to ride the horse during the parades. Club Congo, same block as the Alabama and the Dunbar, was another option for middle-class people if they wanted a nice, affordable night on town. The Downbeat, which is another really popular one. 2 doors past the Alabama, 3 doors past Dunbar, 4201 South Central Avenue. The Downbeat was, okay, let me describe it for you. Long, narrow, rectangular. You like it?
No.
A lot of corners. I feel like my eyes are in danger. Some say it was their favorite place to play because
4 corners.
I don't have 4 eyes.
By definition.
Twice. A lot of musicians say it was their favorite place to perform because of the layout of the room, because it concentrated everyone's focus on the music, because the bandstand was in the middle, so you had 3 sides watching you. The 4th side was the bar, but the bar had a mirror to it, so if you were getting drunk at the bar and you didn't want to pay attention to the music, you still had to look in the mirror.
Get a good look at yourself. See what you're doing.
Lazy alcoholics. Another hometown hero, Howard McGee. His bebop band started there in 1945. They were like the first modern jazz ensemble on the West Coast, predating the more heralded arrival of Parker and Gillespie, which would come that same year. Dizzy G. Yeah, McGee became really close with Charlie Parker when he arrived here, but McGee had already been experimenting with bebop before the sound was popularized. They didn't call it bebop, but they were already starting to get into something that was improvisational. Still talking about the Downbeat, Charles Mingus and Buddy Collette premiered their short-lived septet group, the Stars of Swing, perhaps the most important unrecorded jazz band in the West Coast history. The recordings are lost, but the group is said to be very advanced as far as their music went. What I read about the Stars of Swing was they had no leader, and in a good way. Like they just whoever felt like going, they went, whatever that meant. Music stuff, jazz boys, blah blah blah, stop. A frequent to the Downbeat was LA mob boss Mickey Cohen. Ooh, how is this
baby?
Is this the first time we brought up Mickey Cohen? No.
I kind of feel like it is. I feel like there's a few things in this episode that we're introducing these characters that are gonna.
I think I mentioned him when I mentioned the drunk tank at the Lincoln Heights jail, but that's it though.
Yeah. Maybe during the tunnels, when we were talking about the tunnels.
Yeah, I think he did. More than just a jazz fan, Mickey Cohen, his signature was at the bottom of the checks that the band leaders got. Cohen and his busy little mobster hands were toiling with various nightclubs, moving liquor and showgirls around the town for various doings.
In the same bottles.
I need you girls to stack up by the 12 some.
Turn to liquid, all of you.
I'm sure he said that a lot to them. You liking that?
No.
Across the street from the Alabama was the Last Word. 4206 South Central Avenue. It was more modest than the Alabama, and that was sort of the appeal about it. Their demographic was sophisticated crowd. It featured blues and jazz, and it was run by Esvin Mosby.
Of the Mosby Blues Brothers?
Yeah, he's one of the blues blowers. He was now the honorary mayor of Central Avenue, and he worked at the Last Word across the street. So aside from Central Avenue, I have to talk about this event that happened that's really important. I'm going to take you all the way to Vermont and 3rd.
Oh, no.
What is now Koreatown. The Palomar Ballroom was a beautiful music hall. It's a Vons now. I used to go and buy soup there.
A beautiful Vons.
The best Vons, the swingingest Vons you've ever been to. This side of the Mississippi. The Palomar is indeed far from Central Avenue, but it deserves a mention because many say that this spot, August 21st, 1935, first time that swing music caught the attention of the public and became a national phenomenon for years to come. Swing music started on...
It went viral?
It was, of course, led by the king of swing himself, who he wasn't called that yet, Benny Goodman. He'd been touring the country with his orchestra and not really doing that well.
A non-black musician. I see you give him a special segment.
I wouldn't have said it if I hadn't gone to that Vons. I'm like, yeah, he'd been touring the country with the orchestra, trying to get swing off the ground, and no one was really liking it. They were bombing in New York and Chicago. A lot of bookers were saying that people weren't liking the new sound, that audiences wanted something sweeter. Discouraged, they entered LA not really expecting much to go well. They didn't really think much of the West. They were booked at the Palomar for 3 weeks, to play for 3 weeks, and they entered into that show with new material kind of cautiously, playing stock arrangements to entertain. It was drummer Gene Krupa. If we're going to die, Benny, let's die playing the stuff that we want to play. Goodman agreed.
And I don't know if you're going to that or...
No, I'm not.
Die he did.
Die indeed he did. It's very funny. I love that we laugh at dead people. Goodman agreed.
Just musicians.
Buddy Holly, what a joke.
Big popper.
That's not what I like. And Goodman agreed with whatever Gene Krupa said before, and they ditched the stock arrangements for some swing arrangements. And as soon as Bunny Berrigan began trumpeting out solos from Fletcher Henderson tunes like King Porter's Swamp, the Palomar went insane. People were dancing and applauding. Many people just stood close to the band to watch them play this electrified sound, which was new to them. The crowd was drawn in because of the radio. Now, earlier that year, they had done a radio show called Let's Dance. But the thing about that was they were the third orchestra to play, and they came on really late. But because of the time difference, they came on and played. Their segment happened at 9 o'clock, so everybody heard it. Mm-hmm. So when Benny Goodman came to play the Palomar, everybody's waiting for him already. They already heard swing and they loved it. By the end of that tour, he had a new moniker, like I mentioned already, the King of Swing. Uh-huh. Swing was a national phenomenon because of that, everything that happened at 3rd and Vermont. So, next time you go over that Vaughn's on 3rd and Vermont, why don't you say, where's Benny Goodman? I'll say, who are you talking about? But the same in Spanish. The Palomar Ballroom went up in flames in October of 1939. That's the second fire tonight. Yeah. Fire purifies all. Another sacrifice. There's a lot of other clubs. I'm going to mention their names, but I couldn't really find too much about them. The Brown Bomber, which was named after Joe Louis. The Dolphins of Hollywood.
Yeah, I read he owned a club.
Yeah, the Brown Bomber. Yeah. The Bird in the Basket. The Ritz, Glenn's Back Room, Casablanca. The Cobra Room, which hosted jam sessions. Jack's Basket Room, where you could find Dexter Gordon and Ward L. Gray dueling saxophones, which must have been, whatever. There was the Paradise Club, the Atlantic Club, the Elks Hall at 4016 South Central Avenue didn't have great acoustics, but they did accommodate a large crowd, which, you'd see like Count Basie there, you'd see Big Jake McNeely there. I like that the names keep popping up. Usually that would annoy me, but it just means that people were moving. The problem with this is the same one why we can't do like the comedy scene in LA, because there's no static thing that's happening. Like everyone's just like, hey, he was here, then he was here, then it was here, and it was funny, and it might have been funny, and it was here, and it was here.
But hey, we're still not discounting a comedy scene episode. That won't stop us.
The 5-4 Ballroom, which was 308 West 54th Street. 54th. Built in 1922 for whites who lived in South Central, the 5-4 became a cultural mecca for the black community around World War II, by which time the area had changed radically. Nat King Cole played there, as well as Fats Domino, B.B. King, Dizzy, Ray Charles.
B.B. King?
Yeah, B.B. King. He didn't live here, but he played there.
And I don't care.
Ray Charles broadcast a TV program from there in the 60s. It was still operating as late as 1968. Located on the second floor, the 5-4 was stored in the early 90s as a blues room, 5-4 blues room, in hopes that it would return to its former glory. But it was foreclosed by the bank in the late 90s, so now it's just there empty. In the 1940s, something started called Jazz at the Philharmonic, JATP. It started in 44 at the downtown Philharmonic Auditorium near Pershing Square, which since then been torn down, by a jazz fan and young film editor Norman Granz. It was the first concert series to ever give first-class treatment to jazz musicians. By the 50s, the JATP concerts, which featured outstanding performances that are now all preserved on vinyl, were being produced at concert halls around the world, places like Europe, Australia, Japan, started here. I'm going to take our listeners back to Bronzeville. You got us out of Bronzeville, I'm going to drag them back. That stinking hole. Once everyone was established and everybody was already there, setting up business, legal and otherwise, music scene started to open up there. You had places like the Finale Club, which featured some of the best jazz one can hear in Southern California, and was run by Howard McGee, who I mentioned before. It was near 1st and San Pedro. Tap dancer Foster Johnson presided over the Finale Club. A show started at midnight with liquor provided illegally, of course. You also had exotic dancers, you had comics. Howard McGee's house band worked all night long. They drew in not only Central Avenue Nighthawks, but Hollywood folk as well. You can go and see Judy Garland hanging out. There was a place called Shep's Playhouse, which was one of the breakfast clubs. I'm not talking about the John Hughes film, which I have a little tolerance for. A breakfast club was a club that operated all night long until the morning hours.
Breakfast hours.
Yeah, breakfast hours, when breakfast is traditionally served. Because that had to do with the factories that ran all night. You had men coming in and out, so there was no real clear arrangement of hours.
Knew when one day started and the next started.
Before it was Shep's Playhouse, though, it was a Japanese restaurant called Kawafuku. Shep's Playhouse was a smaller place, so smaller bands could play in the first floor bar and upstairs if you had more elaborate stage shows, the kind that produced by like Leonard Reed or Foster Johnson, the tap dancer. There were big band orchestras, there were dancing girls. Legendary bluesman T-Bone Walker started playing Shep's early in his career. In 1944, trumpeter composer Gerald Wilson started a band to provide music for Shep's. The Playhouse was really popular. It was a place to see and to be seen. Judy Garland, I mentioned her already. When the Japanese citizens returned to their area of business and living and such,
she screamed.
The Kawafuku restaurant was reclaimed, of course, and became notable for introducing sushi to American eateries in the 60s. Huh. I will mention that the longest-running business from Bronzeville era was owned by James Hodge, who had opened a newspaper stand on the corner of 1st and San Pedro in 1942, and it lasted till the 80s. Let's start talking about the boys, yeah?
Oh yeah.
The boys are back in town, because Bronzeville's atrocious. We have to get out of there. Art Tatum, the nearly blind piano player, who many call a prodigy, was a long-time LA resident. Tatum was known to sit at any available piano and Central Avenue with a case of Pabst Blue Ribbon and began playing swing for hours. One of the spots that Tatum would hit up was Ivy's Chicken Shack, which was a small eatery at 1105 and a half East Vernon Avenue, just east of Central Avenue. The Ivy of Ivy's Chicken Shack was vocalist Ivy Anderson, who performed with Duke Ellington for over 10 years. Did you know about this? Keep 'em frying. She had a number of hit records of the day with Duke Ellington. A string of illnesses kept Ivy from performing for so long, so she opened up a restaurant to accommodate the growing music scene. A number of musicians, Art Tatum hung out there, Charles Brown, good grief, when playing for customers while it's the mornings. Anderson lived off of the Avenue, 724.
Charles Brown. He tried to reinvent himself.
She lived right off the Avenue, 724 East 52nd Place, which was just walking distance to her Chicken Shack, which sounds weird. Her restaurant, please, with all due respect. Her block, listed as 52nd Place Historic District, is listed on the National Registry of Historic Places. Good for her. Huh. She made it.
The first Chicken Shack to me.
Ethel Waters, who was a blues and jazz singer. She once lived in a Victorian house at 1910 Harvard Boulevard near Washington Boulevard. It's now painted white with a light green trim. It was then known as the Sugar Hill District of LA.
Yeah.
Sugar Hill was also the first blaxploitation zombie movie. It had nothing to do with Sugar Hill in LA though. Nat King Cole, who we already talked about, once lived in a beautiful brick house at 401 Muirfield Road.
Wait, a brick
house.
That's mighty.
Well, I mean, the house is letting all hang out.
So you said a brick house. Mighty.
Letting it all hang out. Anyways, he lived... homeboy Nat King Cole lived in Hancock Park. Look at this guy. Beautiful area. Yeah. 401 Muirfield Road, nowhere near Central Avenue. But before Cole the Crooner was a household name, he worked in gigs on Central Avenues with his troupe, trying to make it big in Hollywood. He got his start at the 331 Club on Central Avenue and worked his way up.
You know, it's interesting. 331 was the address of Biddy Mason's place.
Really?
I wonder if that's a reference to that.
It might be, because I couldn't find too much about the 331 Club other than he started there.
Just as likely as anything else. Yeah. Maybe perhaps more likely.
When he became successful, his two biggest hits were Route 66 and Unforgettable, both recorded at Capitol Records, LA. And Nat King Cole and Lionel Hampton are both featured playing a boogie woogie foxtrot number called Central Avenue Breakdown, meant to capture the excitement of Central Avenue scene as it was reaching its peak. He's now buried at DeForest Lawn in Glendale with W.C. Fields. Benny Carter moved to...
W.C. Fields just passed out dead in one of the graves.
It's actually the mayor's grave. I brought him roses and I fell in. Oh, no.
I figured, wide his mouth. Now it's better than any time.
Benny Carter moved to LA in 1943, and he got a huge break when he had the opportunity to compose the score for the film Stormy Weather with Bill Bojangles Robinson, which is hard for me to say. Lena Horne's also in that. Although now it's seen as very racially insensitive compared to Jump for Joy. Stormy Weather has some really great performances. Cab Calloway is in it. I like to say Cab Calloway's name as flamboyantly as possible, because in my head he looks like Little Richard. His biggest
it's not just your head.
His biggest hit came with Cow Cow Boogie, which was a novelty tune for a very racist cartoon that I believe Walter Lantz did of, I believe, Woody Woodpecker. Consult episode Meekly Go Round broke down. The cartoon is atrocious, but the song is really neat. Other folks that have to be mentioned, their careers are, like I said, way too immense to even start here, but they all hometown guys. Charles Mingus was raised in Watts, an incredible bass player, great band leader. Dexter Gordon grew up in Los Angeles. He was taught by Samuel Brown and all. Dexter's father was a doctor. Among his patients, Lionel Hampton, Duke Ellington. Daddy, what's wrong with them? Tell me their secrets. Art Pepper, saxophonist who was born in Gardena, found himself stuck with the West Coast cool jazz label, which he fought. I can't say anything worthy of Art Pepper, but look at his really, really great autobiography, which is one of like the first things I read all the way through, called Straight Life. I do have one story though. I think I told you this just in passing before we ever started the podcast, when we would just tell each other stories that interest us.
When we wouldn't record all the stories we tell each other.
And they took even longer than this. One story I recall from his autobiography. Art Pepper used to live in Echo Park on what is the steepest street in Los Angeles, Fargo Street, which is where I was raised. William Claxton even took a photo of him walking up Fargo carrying his sex, smiling miserably because he was dope sick. He lived there with his wife, and both the Peppers were heroin addicts. When she overdosed, Art called 911, but the ambulance couldn't make it up Fargo and park. So the ambulance drivers had to get out with a gurney and all the equipment and run up Fargo to get her.
How is that possible?
Gravity was not on their side on that one. On the other side of that hill, in the, I believe, the late 80s, the Hillside Stranglers would leave a body in the trunk of a car within city skyline. And on the other side of that hill, I was growing up.
In the trunk of a car?
The trunk of a car, coincidentally. It was a Ford Denim. Chet Baker was another troubled drug addict and jazz legend. Chet Baker wasn't born in LA. He came to LA in the late 40s, early 50s. So he wasn't really based in Los Angeles in any concrete way, but the way he played and everything that kind of associated with him, he's very associated with the West Coast style, which I'm sure he didn't like either. Another one of my favorites, Percy Mayfield, a really great blues singer, moved to Los Angeles in 1942. He wrote and composed songs for almost 10 years before he got his big hit, Please Send Me Someone to Love. If you haven't heard it, suggested listening.
Required listening.
He was starting to get really noticed in the music scene, but a car accident sidelined his career for a long time. He was left with he has this huge gash on his forehead. So he started shying away from performing, but he kept writing.
Like Harry Potter.
A little bit like Harry Potter, but
more magical.
More magical. I mean, if it's more magical because Ray Charles recorded one of his songs, Hit the Road Jack, and it became hugely successful, so he kept writing for Ray Charles.
That truly is a magical life.
So let's talk a little bit about the bird, Charlie Parker.
The bird is the word.
The bird is the word.
Charlie Parker's the word.
The genius junkie. The bird, Charlie Parker, was welcomed to LA with open arms by young modern jazz practitioners like pianist Hampton Hawes, Howard McGee.
Wait a minute. Oh, okay. I thought you said something else, and I think you might have, but
Hampton Hawes.
His title.
Cocky Hampton Hawes. I mean, when he was coming to town, they were very happy, and they hung out with him a lot. They learned things, but he was also soaked in heroin. Charlie Parker hated Los Angeles with a Faulkner-like passion. He once said, "I can't tell you how much I yearn for New York." And Dizzy and Charlie were invited by Billy Berg to do a 2-month stint at the Billy Berg's Club in Hollywood. So they boarded a train in December of 1945. For Charlie Parker, the 2-month gig turned into a year and a half of hellish self-destruction while managing to somehow perform and record.
How'd we miss him in the Forgotten, or not the Forgotten, for the Visitors to LA?
That would have been a good one.
Yeah.
During his stay in Los Angeles... I'll just do his entire segment now. During his stay in Los Angeles, it was all highs and lows. He recorded some of his best music here. Night in Tunisia was recorded here in LA.
Really?
Yeah. He also went through really...
Was it recorded in Tunisia?
Part of me thought it was too. He also went through, of course, really brutal heroin withdrawals and a visit to Camarillo, which we'll talk about. If you've read that first line in Jack Kerouac's novel, you'll know what I'm talking about.
Discount jackets?
You want to go to that really nice In-N-Out.
The Burlington outlet.
So they were invited as a quartet, but Gillespie brought 5 people instead of 4. So it was the Diz himself, Parker, bassist Ray Brown, drummer Al Haig, and vibraphonist Milt Jackson. Dizzy did this because he knew Charlie Parker's habits and wanted to be able to fill the sound out should Parker not show up, which was a frequent occurrence. The way F. Scott Fitzgerald and Faulkner drank, Charlie Parker did the same thing with heroin.
God.
But he also drank. Sometimes like a gallon of cheap wine to himself. He was also popping pills. On the train ride to Los Angeles, when the train stopped to take on water somewhere in Arizona, Charlie Parker wandered off into the middle of the desert looking for a fix. And they had to
Why do these people, these geniuses, they somehow get lost in the desert?
Something about the desert's so appealing to them.
The prickly pears.
They had to talk him back onto the train. It was another 20 hours to go. When he arrived in LA, an admirer informed the talented junkie that heroin was expensive and hard to come by in LA, but he'd manage. There was something floating around Central Avenue called mud, which was like low-grade opium with twigs and dirt still in it.
Oh, God.
But he eventually upgraded with the help of a man named Emery Bird. Bird and bird. The birds of the word.
That's in the
2 birds in 1 stone.
Their law office.
And I can't wake them up. A lot of jazz fans probably are aware of Emery Bird without knowing it. For Emery Bird was also referred to as Moose the Mooch, the title of one of Parker's classics. Parker went and named a song after Emery Bird because he had the best heroin in Los Angeles. Moose the Mooch, or Emery Bird, I'm sure as he preferred to be called, was a former honors student and athletic star at Jefferson High School, and he became paralyzed by polio. I don't know, whenever Bronzeville started, what, the 40s? Or
43, it kind of came into its own.
He was working at a newsstand in Bronzeville, which was also used to sell records, which was also underneath both those things up front. Emery the Mooch was dealing heroin, and Parker was so appreciative that not only did he name a song after him, which it would become very popular, Parker
left him a tip.
Here's a tip. Play the alto instead. Parker signed over half of his royalties for his dial recordings to the dealer, whose address was switched to San Quentin State Prison by that time. According to drummer Ray Porter, who drove Parker to the session for the recording of that, Parker started writing Mooch in the car on 35th and Maple and finished it when they got to Santa Monica Boulevard in Hollywood by the time they got the recording studio.
How much traffic was there?
That's what I kept thinking. It's probably like 9 hours.
If it was like 5:30, I'm not that impressed.
It's like 2 days. Bring a tent for that ride. So
especially if you're on heroin.
Can't keep track of time when on your heroin. After their stint at Berg's, which was legendary in a good way, sometimes in a good way, sometimes in a bad way, Dizzy left for New York in February of 1946, which was the allotted time he was meant. The Bird stayed here. He stayed here because he cashed in his return ticket for heroin money. He began recording with Ross Russell and trying to get something down on vinyl, but more importantly, just trying to get high all day. He recorded the Dial sessions, which are really important in his collection during his time, which was between March of 46 and December of 47. Here's the thing about the Dial sessions. The record shop owner, like Ross Russell, started Dial Records solely to record Charlie Parker while he was in Los Angeles. That's how big Charlie Parker was. Russell managed to assemble top-notch talent for Parker's Dial sessions. Howard McGee, who played trumpet, pianist Dodo Marmarosa.
That word again.
I say it really fast. It's making me hot. Oh boy, I'm salivating.
I hear that word.
Hands clench up. Dodo Marmarosa.
Flexing.
He played piano. Jimmy Bunn, bassist.
Jimmy Bunn?
Bunn, B-U-N-N. All right. Bassist Bob Kesterson and drummer... Kesterson? Did you say Kesterson? And drummer Roy Porter all jammed with Parker at Little Tokyo's, like I said, semi-legal finale club, which trumpeter Howard McGee ran. He continued playing with McGee's group at the Swing Club and continued a descent into insane substance abuse. He eventually broke down during a series of recordings in July of that year, 46. He struggled to play really simple phrases on the song Max is Making Wax. During the recording of the song, he missed most of the first two bars of the first chorus of the track. When he finally did come in, he swayed wildly and once spun all the way around away from his microphone. The recordings document all too well the difficulty that Bird was having playing while needing a fix. After working on
a snore.
Salt and peanuts and heroin. After working on these recordings, he went back to his room. I believe this was at the Civic Hotel in Bronzeville. Passed out with a lit cigarette and set his hotel room on fire.
Another fire.
The third fire. He was found wandering the hall of his hotel and in the street half naked. When the LAPD came for him, he resisted their attempts to arrest him, resisting arrest, and was clubbed and taken to the station. After spending 10 days in jail, he was committed to the California State Mental Hospital in Camarillo.
Outlet hospital.
You can get your affordable healthcare there. He stayed there for 6 months. Apparently, Parker received shock treatment while in Camarillo, and it was so bad that he almost bit off his tongue. I know. That's awful.
Why didn't they give him something to bite on?
They learned from that.
Put a saxophone reed in his mouth.
He was hitting the notes. While in Camarillo, Parker played saxophone in the hospital band. They performed a small bandstand on Saturday nights. He also passed the time by tending a lettuce patch. That's adorable. Yeah. His classic song "Relaxing at Camarillo," which was about his time there.
Do you think that's?
Do you think it's a veiled reference? Veiled.
It's a metaphor.
He met at Santa Barbara. This was recorded in 47 on Parker's sober return to Los Angeles after his hospital stay. His Dial Sessions recordings upon his return are famous now. Some call them an indispensable part of his musical opus recorded, so that's good. It's good that something good came from all that heroin use.
All that jazz.
Hampton Hawes and Howard McGee helped nurse him back to health. Saxophonist Big J McNeely proudly recalls that he got his mom to wash Charlie Parker's laundry. My mom, can you believe it?
A proud day.
Proud day. Thanks to McGee, bebop was already like a LA keystone, but Parker gets credit for introducing the sound to the era, which isn't really fair. But I think really what happened was Parker's arrival in his most lucid moments helped refine their sounds and accents and taught bebop players how to handle life off stage or how to not handle life off stage. His stay at Camarillo cleaned him up, and he continued to play clubs in LA, but started drinking really heavily to compensate, and the same effect was pretty much taking place. I think December of 47, he returned to New York and fell off the wagon again. The Bird returns to Los Angeles in 1952. He's been using and abusing again, and his health is on the decline. Like before, he was nursing his withdrawal pain with alcohol binges. So it's July 1952. An eccentric sculptor named Jihar Zorthian, who was an Armenian genocide survivor, invited Charlie Parker and his band to come play at his Altadena ranch, where he was having a party, and asked Bird if he can perform with the band. His ranch was one of those bohemian party spots where artists would go and intellectualize partying as if it was more than just frat guys, but with wine instead of beer. Zorthian met a drunk Parker through a sculptor friend, who was a female, and decided to haul up to his ranch and have more fun, quotes, which translated to skinny dipping and horseback riding.
Parker naked horseback, right?
Oh, that would hurt. Man, the horse might like it though. I'd like it if the horse liked it. Parker loved his time at the Zorthian Ranch and agreed that he would repay Zorthian by having a jam session for the party. Time to pay up was July 14th, a Monday, because it was an off day for the jazz clubs. Zorthian had a few stipulations. He wanted Parker and his band to start playing at 9:30. Charlie said fine. He said, none of your junkie friends are invited. Parker said, fine. So, of course, the first people to arrive are Parker's junkie buddies. Around midnight.
The witching hour.
The witching hour, not the witching hour. Nighttime's the right time. Midnight's not the right time. Nighttime's the right time. Night and day, night and day, night and day. A pickup truck comes to the ranch carrying about 6 band members and a piano. No Charlie Parker. And the crowd was already there, waiting anxiously to see the bird. Is it the bird or bird?
Just wheeled out a parakeet. I don't know. The bird.
It might be Bird.
Oh, Birdman. That's who it is.
Birdman! The band as well thought Parker was already at the party, which was not a good sign. But because this was a regular occurrence, the band knew just start without him. So they played for about an hour when Bird showed up, about 1 in the morning. Zorthian was kind of peeved and is like, all right, get on stage, to which Bird responds, nah, I think I would rather go swimming. No. So they coaxed him to start performing, and the party starts picking up. And then the bird starts playing, and a beautiful woman approaches Zorthian and Parker and said if Parker asked nicely, she would perform a striptease for the crowd. Parker responded by getting on his knees and begging her, darling, please. So Parker kicks into Embraceable You as this woman climbs on top a rocking horse that Zorthian himself had sculpted and painted and started to slowly, sensually take her clothes off. Striptease, if you will. Which got the crowd going, and they were shouting, take it off, take it off, take it off. How do I know that? Because it's recorded, and you can hear it on YouTube.
Oh, God.
It's kind of weird.
This is
It's a lot of laughing. It's not, yeah, whatever. Parker
got crying.
Put it back on, Mom. Parker got so excited by the striptease that he dropped his pants. Can you imagine? He was probably playing with an erect pianist.
He became a pianist that night.
Then Zorthian took off his shirt.
He dropped his pants.
Dropped his pants, like by accident. You dropped your. Oh, I dropped my pants. Oops.
Wait, the Zorthian
took off his shirt,
and
then about 3/4 of the crowd followed suit.
What is that? Who is that helping if he takes his shirt off? Who's benefiting?
A naked people party.
Oh no!
As Charlie Parker and his band performed,
with Charlie Parker's pants being dropped.
Yeah. Somebody's girlfriend had mentioned that like he was playing and throwing his body back, so his penis was like flopping around.
This sounds like
I would hate being there.
A dream I had when I.
But everybody's related to me, and I'm not supposed to be there. I mentioned this because it's a party that's still talked about amongst like jazz fans and stuff. I was very curious about it, so when I started reading about Charlie Parker on Central Avenue, I had to find out more, so I felt obligated to tell this story. Bird died in New York in 1955 from a bleeding ulcer and liver disease. The coroner looked at him and rounded the age of his body to be about 50 or 60. He was 34. So bebop happens, of course. Swing is come and gone. Bebop is kind of faltering out. Tastes in music were changing by the 60s. R&B and rock and roll, back when we were all still rolling, started to dominate the charts, and jazz was just for aficionados. Jazz fans scattered across the county, but somehow they all ended up congregating in Hollywood, which was considerably more desirable than the dying Central Avenue, because it was dying. LA and Frisco's contribution to jazz and blues gets downplayed because they kind of started late in the game. West Coast jazz has somehow become shorthand for a light, airy sound originated by white musicians working in the 50s.
Yeah.
Many musicians do not associate themselves with that title because it's essentially a put down. You would get pigeonholed if other artists or bookers thought you were a West Coast jazz player. The stigma of West Coast jazz or cool jazz still holds today, apparently, and it's a very uncomfortable subject amongst California jazz performers.
California, as they would call it.
California is the place to be.
Jazzifornia.
Coolifornia. But by many accounts, this connotation is false. If anything, the jazz that originated from Central Avenue and the West Coast in general tend to be more experimental and improvisational. They were influenced by New Orleans jazz, and they kind of touched upon bebop before they even knew what they were doing. It's the same thing that happened to the Beach Boys. I think it's affected by the Beach Boys and the beach and the idea of the West Coast. And once you put West Coast on anything, you automatically put something in shorts, you know?
If you put Charlie Parker in the West Coast, you don't have anything.
You definitely don't have pants. Many claim that they were so experimental and improvisational that they were never recorded and barely documented. But like everything else, the East Coast likes to claim that Los Angeles has no culture or intellectualism. There wasn't many music writers either covering Central Avenue jazz. So there's no intellectualizing the happenings that happen on the side of town. There's no like processing and like building up of legend and myth. So there's nobody documenting and slowly seeing progression. It's just like, well, this stuff happened. We have some record of it, but nobody's really paying attention. Something else that didn't help was the fact that Miles Davis' Birth of the Cool was recorded here at Capitol Records. That record is associated, of course, with cool jazz players. Following the decline of Central Avenue, the jazz scene moved out to Western Avenue between 30th and 40th Street. Had places like the Tiki Room, which was on Western and 37th, Club Oasis.
That's in Disneyland.
Club Oasis also sounds like it's at Disneyland. And the California Club, which was on St. Andrew and Martin Luther King Boulevard. Western Avenue kept it up for a while, but it was a poor substitute for Central Avenue because there was no positive support built on it. The local 767 ended in 1953 with a merger of the Segregated Musicians Union, which was finalized. Focus went to the Hollywood office, and the Central Avenue Musicians Union had to dissipate. They became Local 47 after that. Hooray for integration, sure, but another gem in Central Avenue Treasure Chest was gone, so that's kind of a bummer. With bebop and that scene, there was a lot of drugs, and because of the drugs, it was no longer favorable to be on Central Avenue. A lot of clubs were closing at the time. A lot of police officers were raiding everything. A lot of professional black men in the community they had the opportunity to move to other places, and they took the opportunity. Samuel Brown was one of those. Moved to Pacific Palisades. A lot of guys were moving to Baldwin Hills or Beverly Hills. So a lot of positive reinforcement that they had before was gone. The electric trolley, the red car system, ended around that time, which carried everybody all up and down Central Avenue, so their way to get around was gone now.